Impact of Influence.
Covering true crime throughout the Southeast.
Hello, friend. Matt Harris, Seton Tucker. So grateful you're going to spend time with us again. And what do we have coming up, Seton?
We are going to be talking about a road rage incident out of Myrtle Beach where a young man was unfortunately killed. And it involves stand your ground in South Carolina, which we have some very unusual laws. And we're going to be talking to a Wall Street Journal reporter who has done a 2-part series on this case.
It's very, very fascinating, very interesting. Before we get to that, we want to remind you we're part of the Evergreen Podcast Company. Please support our sponsors. And we would love you to go check us out on Impact of Influence Facebook page. And of course, the YouTube channel, which you can get through from there as well. Please subscribe. Need a few more subscribers to make it all worth what we do. We're appreciative of it, very appreciative. And rate and share the podcast and chime in. At the end of the interview we have with Valerie, we will have a 911 call for you. But let's move on and start talking about this case with Valerie. So, Seton, we're happy to bring an old friend in from all our Murdaugh days. And of course, she wrote the book, The Devil at His Elbow, Wall Street Journal reporter, Valerie Bauerlein. Hello, Valerie.
Hello.
And I was on spring
I'm
break.
waiting for you to say, I'm waiting for you to say the magic words, Matt.
Oh. Yeah. Hello, friend.
I was actually on spring break last week with my daughter, and I ran into someone at a taco bar, and she was telling me about this story that she read from South Carolina. It was the craziest thing. She's a prosecutor in Cape Cod. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is Valerie, who we know through the whole Murdaugh case, and we're interviewing her next week. So she actually texted me yesterday. She said she just read part 2 of your Wall Street Journal article, and she's super excited to hear our podcast.
And we have your book right here underneath.
Yeah, we are using it as a microphone stand. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, I'm honored. I'm glad it's getting upcycled.
This story, Weldon Boyd fatally shot and killed Scott Spivey, road rage encounter, claiming self-defense under South Carolina Stand Your Ground law. And let me start with this. How did it come to your attention?
Well, y'all know this, but I'm based in Raleigh. I covered the South for the Wall Street Journal, but I grew up in Wilmington. And I grew up, in Wilmington before I-40 was finished. So it was a town of like 30,000 people. So Myrtle Beach, growing up in the southeastern corner of the state back in the day, was like we shot for prom dresses in Myrtle Beach. So I follow the news there out of interest. And as you know, there have been a multitude of interesting cases down there lately. The Micah Miller case, for example. Mm-hmm. So I tend to follow the news in South Carolina pretty closely. But this was one where I was doing, I did publish my first book last year, The Devil at His Elbow. And I was doing some fact checking with Mark Tinsley, who is the attorney from the Beach family, who y'all know. And he mentioned a case that had come across his desk. This was more than a year ago. So, and I was looking for some stories about Stand Your Ground. I think it's just a really interesting we remember maybe in the mid 2000s when these laws were on the books, but we don't talk about them very often. So I was looking for some cases, and I ended up talking to Scott Spivey, the young man who was killed. I talked to his sister more than a year ago about this case. And over time, y'all know last year was a very busy year news-wise with the election and everything. And it was just in the back of my mind that I wanted to come back to the story. And then in February of this year, there was just a major break in the case that blew it wide open. And that was the discovery of some secretly recorded phone calls that made the story that much more compelling because we could hear the killers in their own voices, so to speak. So.
All right, let's tell our listeners what this story is about. How did this initial road rage happen? Like, how did it start?
Sure. So it started, it took place on September the 9th of 2023. And there was a young man named Scott Spivey, and he was having some beers, Miller Lights and Fireball shots at the Buoys on the Boulevard. I'm sorry, at Boardwalk Billy's. There's two restaurants we care about in this story. So Scott Spivey was watching Clemson football, like you do on a Saturday afternoon at a bar and talking with the other people there. And around 5 o'clock, 5:15, he got up to drive home from North Myrtle Beach to his home in Tabor City, which is just across the North Carolina state line. And he was coming through that bit. There's a very busy intersection in North Myrtle Beach, one of the most accident prone in the state, actually. And right after he crossed into that intersection, it's some sort of road rage beef with another driver. And that driver's name is Weldon Boyd. And so we don't know what the trigger was, but Weldon Boyd has said that he and his best friend, this guy Bradley Williams, were in their truck minding their own business. And all of a sudden, this black truck comes out of nowhere, and the guy was waving a gun out the window. So it started this altercation there in this very busy part of North Myrtle Beach that led to really a longer than 9 mile chase through suburban Horry County, which is sort of extraordinary to think about.
Yes, of course. And so at one point, Scott Spivey turns off.
Yeah.
And they follow him.
After 9 miles.
Yeah, after this 9 miles that you mentioned.
Yeah.
They follow him. And then this is when the deadly incident occurs.
Yeah, so this chase goes for, better than 9 miles up Highway 9, which goes from like the suburbs into a bunch of golf courses and then really into the country, into farmland up towards Loris, which is right on the South Carolina line. And at one point, Scott Spivey is in front of Weldon Boyd and brake checks him and sends him into the ditch. He's pulling a trailer and sends him into the ditch. But Weldon Boyd rights his truck and keeps going. And about 5 minutes into the chase, he calls 911 and says, there's a guy out here who's driving crazy. You need to get the police out here. He's armed. We're armed as well. As he keeps this up, I'm going to shoot him. So he was on the phone with 911 following Scott Spivey. And after 9 miles, Scott Spivey turned off on a country crossroads. It's called Camp Swamp Road. And it's the shortcut he took to go home from that area. He pulls over on the side of the road, gets out of his truck. And that was a pivotal decision. He got out of his truck and he had his .45 pistol down at his side with a slide back. And, the closest witness said, do not follow me anymore. And he was turning maybe to jump back into the truck or get back into the truck. And then the shots rang out and there's dispute over who shot first. But what the evidence does show is that Weldon Boyd had his gun up on the dashboard pointing at Scott Spivey, as did Bradley Williams, his friend in the passenger seat. They were both armed. And they shot through the windshield of that truck 40 times. They 40 unloaded times. Their magazines, reloaded, and continued shooting at Scott Spivey. Which means
that Scott was in the car at that point, obviously.
So he had gotten out of the car, but at some point he got back in the car.
He got out of the car.
His truck.
And he got out of his truck and the door was open. And he gets out of his truck holding his pistol with a slide back, which means he was preparing to fire, but there wasn't a bullet in the chamber yet. It was sort of, when the slide's back, it in many ways it sends a message like, hey, don't mess with me. And it's not clear exactly when he jumped back in the cab of his truck, but he did jump back in the cab of his truck and fired his weapon from inside his truck at least 10 times, maybe 11.
Is he firing out
the back window, maybe, but what we now know is that he was shot outside of the truck. So he was shot before he dove back in, and he died within seconds, less than a minute, from a fatal shot. And this is critical. He died from a fatal shot to the back.
Now, there is proof that he fired his gun, I take it, right? There's casings or something like that?
Yes, there are multiple casings inside the truck.
Or in the car, or his truck. They both were driving trucks, right?
Yeah, there were multiple, and they were firing different kinds of bullets. So we know that there were casings from his weapon inside of his truck. There was one casing outside of the truck, but it was down by the wheel well of the driver's side door. So it's not clear whether that was fired while he was outside or while he was inside, if it rolled out of the truck, because it was right underneath the door. The family feels strongly that it rolled out because his gun, he's right-handed, and his gun ejects to the right. So if he was standing in the middle of the road and shot, the casing would have been far over into the road as opposed to up underneath the driver's side door. But it's not clear.
I'm going to tell them that we're going to play the 911 call after Valerie. We're going to have that whole 911 call for you. Okay, see. Yeah.
Oh, no, but the fatal wound was to the back.
Correct.
And they said that right away, if I'm not mistaken. Paramedics arrive, or EMT, and they say that right out of the gate, correct?
Yeah, and this is a part of the world, y'all. it's suburban Horry County, it's rural Horry County, but this is a very tight-knit community. It's a farm town up there, and people know each other. And so the first paramedics, Scott Spivey is shot around 5:58 p.m. and the first officer gets there at 6:10. Paramedics are on the scene within just a few minutes after that. And they accompany that first officer up to check on Spivey to see if he needed any medical attention, if he was still alive. They quickly established that he wasn't, but there are four of them that circled the cab kind of in the back seat and in the front seat to get a look at what happened. And we know all this because we have the benefit of body cam footage from the first officer on the scene. And so you see these paramedics looking at this, Scott Spivey's body. He's collapsed over the console in the front, and they can see on the side of his face he's got a graze wound, just a bullet graze. But they're trying to figure out why he's not shot in the chest, why there's not a lot of blood coming out of his chest if he was shot and if he died of a chest wound.
Because I remember because of all the bullet holes in the windshield.
Yes, they thought the thinking was, well, if he was the aggressor and he shot first, then he would have been shot in the chest. Right. Yeah, if he was out when he was outside the vehicle. But what you see two things happen. The lieutenant on from the paramedics. This is a combination volunteer professional fire department out there. It's still common in rural areas to have them be the first responders. And the lieutenant knew Scott Spivey, and he looks down at the floorboard of the truck, and we know that his business cards are in the floorboard of his truck. He was an insurance adjuster, and so this was really his mobile office. And you see kind of the realization dawn on this man's face. He says, "Wait a second. I know him. His last name's Spivey, right? Scott Spivey." And the officer says, "I don't know and don't care." And then they start questioning him about what happened. And they say, well, he was shot in the back. There's no exit wound to the front, but we see an entrance wound in the back. And it was clear, you find out later from their estimation, their experience, if he'd been shot through the vehicle, if the bullet these were hollow point bullets that were being fired. And if they'd come through the glass or through the vehicle into his body, it would have done catastrophic damage. It was the type of damage that's done from being struck a clear shot as opposed to an obstructed shot. And they, one of the paramedics even questions the officer. He follows him around outside the truck and he said, "Let me ask you this because I'm nosy. If if Spivey shot first, and he wasn't, and he wouldn't even been shot in the chest." And then he says, "But if the other guy shot him and he shot in the back, doesn't that mean the other guy's at fault?" And the officer said, "No." And he'd only been on the scene a few minutes, but he said, "No, he must have been firing over his shoulder." So from all that is to say, from very early on, the police decided that Scott Spivey was the aggressor in this case almost immediately. And they made decisions. The paramedic wasn't the only person that recognized Scott Spivey. There was another guy who's like, "I know him. He goes to church. We know each other."
I know. I've read that in your article.
But nobody called the family. It's very reminiscent of Mallory Beach and the boat wreck and the Paul Murdaugh, the disastrous boat wreck in that case. Nobody called the family from 5:58 p.m. until they heard a rumor and roll up on the scene at 9:25.
And they have the name. They have the number. This paramedic knows him.
He has his business card in his truck.
Yeah.
And his license is in his pocket, and the truck was co-registered to his dad. So it had the contact, and they lived just a few miles up the road. It had his contact information on there. So there was really a lot of procedures were not followed according to policy, as I understand it.
And I want to get to the connection between the police and the shooter in a second.
But I want to ask first, there was one witness who really stuck out to me in your article, Frank McMurrow. Mm-hmm. What did he say he saw happen?
Well, and this is one of those things where early on the police say, and you can hear it in the body cam footage, they'll say, "Well, I've got multiple witnesses backing up the story. I've got multiple witnesses." They had 5 witnesses that pulled over on the side of the road. But what I realized going through hundreds of pages of the police file and all of this, 20 hours of body and dash cam videos, y'all, just you see it happen in real time. The game of telephone. I've got multiple witnesses who say this, and he was firing his gun way down the highway, which there's no evidence to support that. So they had 5 witnesses. One was a young woman named Blaze Ward, who had seen part of the chase, and she actually calls 911 and to report it. But she chases them as well. She stays up behind them, and when they turn on
Why
Camp
are all
Swamp
these
Road,
people chasing people? This is crazy to me.
well, yeah, no comment. But she turns in on Camp Swamp Road behind these guys, and Weldon Boyd's truck is enormous. It's a Dodge TRX Ram. It's an oversized super truck, and he's got a trailer, an extended trailer behind it, hauling some lawn furniture. So she pulls in behind, and she does not see the shooting. So witness number one doesn't see it. There's another married couple, the Wrights, Monica and Terry Wright, and they also witnessed part of the road rage incident, but they got stuck in traffic 5 miles back on Highway 9, and they only pull over further down the road because they recognized the trucks as being the ones that they saw driving so aggressively. So they did not see the shooter. So that's three of your five that didn't see it. The fourth and the fifth are Lindsay and Frank McMurrough, a married couple from Virginia, and they were on their way down to Myrtle Beach to spend the week with some friends and kind of a working vacation. And they're driving down Camp Swamp towards the highway as opposed to following them on the highway. So he has a view of Scott Spivey getting out of the truck. They're coming down this rural road. They don't know where they are. They're just, kind of coming from Virginia to get to Myrtle Beach.
And unaware of the road rage stuff because
unaware, totally unaware.
Yeah.
And Frank McMurrough knows from guns. I mean, he grew up with guns. He carries weapons. He's trained on weapons, and he saw the weapon. And he said to his wife, "Gun, get down." And he pushed her head down in her lap. Right. So 4 out of the 5 did not see the shooting. So Frank is the only person that saw even a little bit of it. And what he describes is he's driving forward. He sees Scott Spivey stop, get out of the truck with his gun down at his side, and he's the one who witnessed him saying, "Do not follow me anymore." But Frank McMurrow is driving straight forward, so he effectively passes Scott Spivey, and then about 25 yards down the road is the white truck, Weldon Boyd's truck, and he says he sees Weldon Boyd's hands up on, holding his weapon. He's got a 9mm up on the dashboard, and he's in a panic. The driver is in a panic. So he speeds up, and in his rearview mirror, the last thing he sees is Scott Spivey he said it looked like he was being hit by paintballs, like his shirt was rippling like that.
Wow.
So he didn't see the shooting itself, but he saw Scott Spivey be the aftermath. And his 911 call is fascinating because he says, "I don't know what happened here, but it looks like the guy just unloaded a full magazine into this other guy." And so he's the closest witness that they have. So to say that there are multiple witnesses that back up Weldon Boyd's account is not credible.
There's witnesses that can say there was road rage, but not witnesses
for
to
sure.
the incident. Yeah.
And there's no question I think in my mind or in the evidence that Scott Spivey probably shouldn't have been driving. He'd been drinking for several hours. He was, there were a couple people that said he was driving erratically after he got into this thing with Weldon Boyd. But no, in terms of the shooting itself, there were not multiple witnesses.
And does Frank McMurrough say he saw at any point Spivey shoot? Did he see that at all?
He didn't. He is the one who was very certain, and he says from the beginning, and he's in, he has the 911 call, which is real time, and then he gives 2 videoed statements that day. He gives one on the side of the road immediately to the first officer on the scene. And then he gives another one, kind of the classic, sitting in the car, the dash cam running, or the body cam running on recording him. And in both of those cases, he says the slide was back. I'm sure of that.
Okay, so after the fact, what's confusing or interesting to me is they haul the car away, but with Scott's body in it, correct?
Yes, and
is that how it's supposed to be?
No, and I think that is one of the so what you're describing is, we had these 2 trucks on the side of the road, and they're both riddled with bullet holes. At least 4, the 40 shots that came out of Weldon Boyd's truck, and then Scott Spivey's truck. The back of his truck looks like it's been through a war zone. It's shot up. So they were going to tow the trucks in evidence. It would be standard. That would be standard when you finish with the procedure, but that's not what happened in this case. And it's very questionable. And I think there's some questions to the legality of the way this was handled. So what happened was Around 7:10, the first detective gets there, the main detective. And you can see all the officers say, "Are you off? Are you off? Check your stuff," which is their body cams go off.
Which is
And
weird. Why are they turning their body cams off?
I do not, I requested the police to they sent me their policies and procedures and the judgment calls they make around that, but they didn't tell me why they all went off almost simultaneously and stayed off for more than an hour. And during that time that we do not have documentation of, Scott Spivey's, the decision is made by someone to tape the truck, the windows of the truck and the doors shut with red evidence tape. They seal it shut. His body's inside. Y'all, it's September in Myrtle Beach. The heat is so baked into the road. It was 80 degrees. It was hot. They sealed Scott Spivey's body up in the truck, loaded it on a flatbed, and towed him 25 miles to Conway to a police impound lot. And not in a couple of things about that stand out. It was not under the supervision of the coroner, which is the law. The coroner takes possession of the body once the processing of the scene is done. That's the law. And then also, the body's not supposed to be out of the possession of the coroner until it goes into the custody of a pathologist for an autopsy, which would be standard in a homicide.
You need that chain of custody of the body.
And that did not happen. And a couple other really questionable things happen. And Seton, y'all have had a terrific pathologist on before. Coroner, the coroner up in York County, a woman named Sabrina Gast, and she talked with me about these procedures. Really interesting perspective. But so the body should have been in the possession of the coroner, and it is against the rules to move the body separate from that.
Were they even, a quick question, did they even call the coroner?
The coroner was there, but the coroner
was there. Okay.
The coroner was there, but the coroner left the scene to go talk to the family. So because the family, as it turns out, had a lot of connections in that area and knew people in the coroner's office. So the coroner left the scene and drove to a cousin's house and sat down with the family at like 9:45 p.m. So the body's being towed without him there, 25 miles, to the impound lot. And they take Scott Spivey's body out of the truck and lay it out on a blue body bag. It looks like a tarp, a blue tarp, but it's a body bag. And they photograph him, which is very unusual. Normally that would be the coroner's job to do that. And they remove his clothing, which is a fireable offense in many coroners' offices, as I understand it, because in shootings in particular, if you're shot through your clothing, that is the best proxy to tell the distance at which you were shot. What is the we talked all about stippling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the distance at which you were shot? And if it's in dispute, how far did Scott Spivey advance on the other vehicle? How far away were they? To have removed his clothing and bagged it up is completely a no-no. It's the first thing that you're taught, from what I understand it in crime scene investigation. So there were many things that happened here that were very unusual, and I think the Spivey family feels like gives them grounds for civil action against the county as well.
Well, all of this stuff didn't come out till later, right? So, yeah, right.
A year and a half later.
A year and a half. Is that how long it was?
Year and a half. Accidentally released a lot of this information. So it really is an extraordinary story. And part of the reason that the Wall Street Journal cares, and part of the reason we think it's so important, is it is not an outlier. These stand your ground homicides, hundreds happen a month, and they do not reach the public consciousness.
100 a month?
Hundreds
a month.
Nationally, on a national scale, because 28 states have these laws, these stand your ground laws. But if you think about it, if the other key witness to a homicide is dead and there's no video footage, and it's a person's word against a person who had died, it's a very difficult case to make. And then you also essentially, the laws are such, you have to prove a negative, which is hard for prosecutors to do. They have to prove that you were not in fear of your life, which is such a subjective measure.
I mean, if you want to shoot somebody, South Carolina is the place to do it. I mean, I, as just a general resident of South Carolina, had no idea. I mean, I knew stand your ground laws were something that we had in this state. I mean, I didn't realize that it also applied to your vehicle. I just thought that, so I do want to delve more into these stand your ground laws in South Carolina, but it shifts the burden.
Well, and I think there's some familiarity with the term, right? You know, we started adopting these in the mid 2000s, starting with Florida in 2005. And at first they called them make my day laws, like the old Eastwood saying, you know, make my day. And it was the theory was that it would make the country a safer place, that if more people were able to protect themselves, you know, outside of their home, then the public safety would be augmented. So in 2005, there was this early law in Florida, and as we see often with the American Legislative Exchange Council, and back then with the NRA, there was some model legislation that got floated in a bunch of red states and adopted immediately in South Carolina, 2006, and a number of other states like Georgia that had these very early laws. And occasionally we think about them. The most significant examples would be like Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, and was George Zimmerman standing his ground in the death of that young man? Similarly with Ahmaud Arbery, the jogger in Georgia, who we found out later was you know he was attacked. He wasn't the attacker. So very occasionally we do hear about these cases if there is video evidence, and if there one party is white and one is black. Sometimes that reaches the national level of intention, but the large majority just go under the radar. And even in this one, you can hear the deputy chief tell Weldon Boyd, you know, in some of these secretly recorded calls, the deputy chief of police in Horry County was a dear friend of the shooter. And you can hear him say, just be glad it was a white male. And
Okay,
also, yeah,
let's
you know,
get to the deputy chief of police of Horry County, Brandon Strickland.
and the Strickland.
Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between Strickland and Boyd? And when was he contacted and how did he become involved?
And you know, I covered when I was younger, I covered the cop beat for several years, and I was one of the best jobs I ever had. And just studying Brandon Strickland's career, you can tell that he was a man in a hurry. He was a man on the rise in that department. He came straight out of the Coast Guard and rose the ranks. So he was only 41 years old, but he had recently been promoted to deputy chief over CID, criminal investigations, over internal affairs, over the SWAT team, like some of the elite units of that police department. And you could read that resume as being a person who could have easily been the next chief. He had just returned in March of 2023, I want to say, I'm sorry, March of 2024. He did like a 10-week stint in Quantico, Virginia with the FBI. He was a very well regarded officer. He was also very, very close friends with Weldon Boyd. And cops eat free at Weldon's restaurant, which is called Boys on the Boulevard in North Myrtle Beach. And they advertise it, and families of law enforcement eat half price, and he co-hosts a lot of events for the cops. What you can hear is that, you know, Weldon Boyd was surreptitiously recording all of his incoming and outgoing calls with an app on his phone. I was not familiar with this app. I mean, because of the consent required for recording interviews. But he had a third-party app on his phone and was recording all of these calls. And so you can hear him tell his seatmate, "Don't worry, I've got a judge. I've got the number two man at the police department. I've got my people." And the next person he calls is minutes after the shooting is Deputy Chief Brandon Strickland. Says, "I need you to come out here right away. I had to kill somebody." And Brandon Strickland says, "Well, hold on, slow your roll. Let me make some calls." And he calls. He makes some calls of himself, and then calls back a few minutes later and tells Weldon Boyd, "I got the right ones coming. You're going to be taken care of. I talked to the captain. I know the detectives, etc." And so the evidence shows whether or not he did any of that is not confirmed for sure because the investigation's ongoing, but he certainly bragged about taking care of Weldon Boyd and making sure that his story would be the official one.
He's like, I wasn't there, but I was there.
Oh, and
Or
we
something
should
along
we
those
should
lines, right?
tell everyone Boyd was recording his calls because of some personal stuff that was going on.
Yes.
Yes.
Weldon Boyd was in a moment of turmoil, and he is a person who's you know, social media shows a lot of high drama. He was a gadfly there in North Myrtle Beach, almost a household name. He reopened his restaurants for outdoor seating early on in the pandemic and started this kind of years-long war with the local officials. He sued a woman over a negative Yelp review that in a case that landed in federal court. He was
Oh,
just a
wow.
he was a guy that really sought, in some regards, the spotlight, and occasionally floated that he was going to run for mayor, stuff like that. So he was well known, but he also, had a lot of drama in his personal life at that time. He'd gotten engaged in March of 2023 to a young woman, and she was pregnant. She got pregnant, and they broke up, 2 months later. And he was in the process the day, September 9th, 2023, the day this happened. He had just that afternoon, he'd served papers on her to get the 5 carat ring back and the custom Toyota 4Runner back. And she turned him over in the middle of the afternoon. He got pictures of them from his family members who met up with her to get the stuff, posted it for sale on Facebook Marketplace at 5:25, which is about 10 to 12 minutes before he runs into Scott Spivey.
He wasn't having a good day.
No.
He was not having a good day. So he was in this dispute with his ex-fiance over these items, but really over custody of their unborn son. And he was suing for full custody of that unborn child at the time. And he was recording all of his calls,
Now,
as we understand it, to get evidence in that to support his case.
it's important to talk about why we got all these calls and access to all this thing,
Yeah.
all this information, because it wasn't like it was just released after the decision was made that they were going to go with the stand your ground law and he was going to be, Boyd was going to be
And
okay.
Spivey was not considered a victim at this point.
Right.
So they weren't releasing the stuff, right? And how were they eventually able to get all of the police files?
A couple of things happen in these cases. There's an expert at Harvard named Caroline Light who wrote a book about these cases. And she said to me, let me guess the pattern of what happened here. And she was exactly right. And she said, this is what typically happens, that if there's no real eyewitness other than the shooters, and in which case, we had one witness at a partial view, then the person who is killed, the person who is not there to tell their side of the story, becomes the bad actor. The person that she's like, their character gets assassinated. They become the person whose every move was scrutinized. How much was he drinking? What was he doing? And then because they go from being a victim to a suspect, the family is in grief, but they don't have access to victims' assistance rights, which are something
Wow.
that many states have felt very strongly about. And in the Murdaugh case, y'all remember, our seats in the courtroom were right behind the victim's advocate, a woman named Trish Allen. And she was there every day to help the different witnesses and the family, to support them. That's a key part of what is offered to families who go through homicides. But because Scott Spivey was not a victim of anything, he did not apply for victims assistance. And that means that the family doesn't get access to the case files. They don't get the regular briefings that would be promised by investigators. And the case file becomes a black box that they don't have access to. And that's exactly what happened here.
I think the sister digs in, right?
And additionally, in a state like South Carolina, there are 6 of these states where all that happens, that no one's charged with any sort of crime. And because the person who's found to be standing their ground in South Carolina has civil immunity, so a wrongful death suit would go nowhere, really.
Wow.
Once they go to a civil lawsuit, there's one procedural step where a civil judge would have to make the same determination that prosecutors did, that there was no crime, that this was not a crime, it was stand your ground.
Wow.
And once the civil court judge makes that decision, it's dead. So for all intents and purposes, and I found no record of any case being filed successfully challenging one of these in South Carolina. What happened here was the family was distraught, and they dogged the case very closely for many months, and they decided that they could see the direction it was headed. And that's when the mother, Scott Spivey's mother, Deborah, had followed the Murdaugh case very closely. And she remembered Mark Tinsley as a personal injury lawyer who took a case that was unpopular in some regards, the Valerie Beach case, and exposed a lot of corruption. So she encouraged her daughter, Jennifer Foley, to call Mark Tinsley. She's like, we live 200 miles from him. He's never going to call me back. But he did. He called her right back, and he took the case because he didn't like the idea that he's a hunter, and he didn't like the idea that you could hunt another person effectively for 9 miles and then say you're standing your ground.
So that's what hooked him. He said, this 9-mile chase, that does not make sense with me with stand your ground.
It doesn't. And he owns, I don't know how many firearms he owns, but dozens, and hunts regularly. It's a big part. I write about it in the book. It's a big part of his identity. And it just offended him that, that this seemed wrong. That why wouldn't Scott Spivey, if he's been chased that far, that fast, and the evidence shows now, and Weldon Boyd brags about this. At one point, he says in these recorded calls, "Oh, he knew his truck couldn't outrun my truck because he was in a Dodge Ram and Scott was in a Chevy Silverado, which doesn't have that powerful Hellcat V8 engine." He says he knew he couldn't outrun my truck and he was terrified. So if the other man is terrified, how is he not the one in fear for his life? And so I think that was what Tinsley got exercised about and got him to take the case.
What I thought was so interesting was when Jennifer Foley, Scott's sister, got access to all this information. It was Super Bowl. She stays up and she listens to all of it, and it doesn't really make sense. And she talks to Mark, and he gets, says, "Hey, listen to this." And so Mark was about to conduct a deposition in the civil case of Boyd, and he asked him about some of these things. What were some of the inconsistencies that were in the information that was given to the family and Mark versus what Boyd said in his deposition?
Before you hit that, I just want to explain how much stuff there was, right? So 911 calls, police records, 20 hours of video recordings from body cams, dash cams, surveillance cameras, 1,000 text messages, 7 hours of recorded calls that authorities obtained from Boyd's phone, and more. So just to give people an idea of how much there was to comb through.
And she stayed up all night and read all of this.
Jennifer Foley, Scott Spivey's older sister, was 2 years older than he, and they were really, she changed all of her social handles to be my brother's keeper. They were very, very close. They attended NC State on full scholarships at the same time. They were very close siblings. They spoke almost every day. And when she started dogging this case as the executor of his estate, she was the one who called Mark Tinsley and fought to get the civil lawsuit filed. But even with that, they didn't have access to the police file. She'd FOIA'd everything. Even after the case was closed, no criminal charges, they would not release the files. But what happened was Tinsley filed a lawsuit on the family's behalf, and the civil discovery process started last June of 2024. And Weldon Boyd's lawyer, a guy named Kenny Moss from North Carolina, right on the line, he files for discovery of everything. He wants everything, anything that he thinks will exonerate his client. In particular, they wanted the toxicology reports on what Scott Spivey had in his system at the time he died. If he was drunk, how drunk was he? If he was taking any type of drugs, what were they?
They mentioned steroids at one point.
Steroids, and they were, and you can hear on the 911 calls, they're very hopeful they'll find steroids in his body because maybe that would explain why he was acting. You could make an argument. Well, he was hyped up. He was in a roid rage. They talk about that. But at any rate, so Weldon Boyd's side is the one that really pushes it for all this information. And Horry County says we're not inclined to supply all that. There's some HIPAA stuff in there, some private stuff, and they're like, no, we want it. And so Horry County just drowns both sides in paper. And this file is 32,000 items. 32,000. Wait, Tinsley told me the first time he opened it, it looked like somebody had organized it by putting it in a blender. Like what is in here? And it was 70 gig of stuff, videos, wow. And it was overwhelming. And for lawyers who have multiple cases going on at one point, just trying to sort through that amount of information, it was not top of the priority list until all of a sudden the deposition of Weldon Boyd is coming up in mid-February of this year. And Jennifer Foley, being, she's a high school biology teacher. She got her minor at NC State in criminal justice. So she worked in the crime lab in North Carolina for a while. She said, well, let me have a look at it. So she drove herself to the law office, picked up a thumb drive, and Super Bowl weekend just starts going through all these files. And she's got two toddlers. She sends her husband and the toddlers to the in-laws' house and buckles down, and she finds an extraordinary treasure trove. All this information we've been talking about, the body cam footage for one, other, documents and texts, but really these hidden phone calls. There were 90 recorded phone calls on Weldon Boyd's phone. And 9 of them were with the deputy chief, but many were with his dad and his mom, where he talks at some length about what happened, and with his best friend, Bradley Williams. So that's what she's hearing, and she's not quite sure what she's hearing. And then she's like, holy crap, this is crazy. And at 6:57 a.m., I've got that text exchange. She texts Tinsley and says, call me right away because the deposition's at 10. We need to talk. And she starts sending him just kind of quick and dirty voice recording and the screen recordings of what she thinks is the most incriminating stuff.
3 hours before.
Yeah, 7 a.m.
Okay.
And he's driving. He lives in Allendale, so he's driving up to Tabor City, North Carolina, which is right over the line. So about 3 hours or so. So he's listening to these calls and planning his questions, because what he wants to establish is that that Weldon Boyd was not in fear. He was angry. And he says, "But you were mad by that point, right?" And he goes, "Oh, I was mad, but I was also fearful." But there's a point where he said he was mad. And then he also said, "Well, you thought he was terrified. The other guy was terrified." And he goes, "I don't know if I ever said that." So he catches him in a number of inconsistencies that are important to the civil case, to proving potentially that it wasn't Weldon Boyd who was standing his ground. So,
Well, just to kind of back on that, you said it's hard to get a civil case,
yeah.
but Tinsley was able to. So a judge, is it how it works? You said a judge makes the initial decision whether it can even proceed to civil.
Correct.
And so what a
So
judge
it's very
did.
hard. And it's really interesting. I wasn't aware of this, but filing these cases is hard for 2 reasons for families. One is that there's the civil immunity for stand your ground as long as a judge agrees. So that's an obstacle that most families don't ever even bring a suit. The other thing is that many of these shootings do take place in a vehicle, your car or truck. And there's an unintentional tort there, meaning it's not the auto insurer's fault necessarily that a shooting took place in their vehicle. It's not some fault of theirs or, the faulty part. So the liability is there's no money in these cases, just to be frank about it. And so lawyers typically do not bring them. But Mark Tinsley is a very successful personal injury lawyer. And his standard fee is 35 to 40%. And even just in the Mallory Beach matter, I think that judgment was around $18 million total, something like that. So he's a person who has resources and just took the case because he could.
Yeah.
But yes, there was the deposition was finally scheduled in mid-February of Weldon Boyd and Bradley Williams, the other young man in the truck. And there was supposed to be a hearing in mid-March in front of a judge who would decide, was Weldon Boyd standing his ground? If he was, the civil lawsuit goes away. If he wasn't, it can proceed.
Oh, so they do depositions before they get to that. Okay,
Yeah, it's sworn testimony in advance of that hearing. But to my knowledge, y'all, there's not been one like this in South Carolina. Nobody's really ever tested the law. And if y'all's listeners know of cases, please let me know, because I've talked to several lawyers about this. So, and it's on hold. That hearing is on hold right now as they work through the criminal investigation of the deputy chief, who has been forced to resign and is under investigation for potential corruption.
Yeah, SLED is investigating him at the moment.
The
Strickland,
yeah.
Deputy Chief, Brandon Strickland.
Okay.
And what's really poignant about that, y'all, is that Weldon Boyd had the law on his side already. It's not clear that any intervention was needed for him to be found to be standing his ground. That he had a case without anybody putting their thumb on the scale. And even if it finds out that Brandon Strickland and his lawyer, in fairness, is a guy named Bert Von Herman, and Bert has told me multiple times, he bragged about helping him. He joked about being glad it wasn't a Black person that he killed. Yeah. But that was bluster. He's like, it's not corrupt to make a bad joke or to brag. That's not an act of political corruption.
One of the things he said in the call was that Boyd said was like, I forget the exact words. I was excited by it, or I was thrilled by it, or something like that. Yeah. And again, that's went back to, well, he's just
It's it's puffery. It's not, he, in Brandon Strickland's case, the deputy chief's case, his lawyer says, bragging about something and trying to help your friend and act like the big guy is not the same as taking action on it.
Yeah.
So, and we'll see about that. But
Well, that's a fair point. We'll just have to see how that plays out with SLED's investigation. I mean, that could be true. We've
Well, and what's
say stuff
pointed about it
sometimes.
is two things. That it's possible Weldon Boyd didn't need that any intervention to reach the same conclusion, but it's also possible, and this is a source of immense frustration for the Spivey family and for Jennifer Foley. At this point, the only investigation that's going on is of Brandon Strickland by SLED. There's no reopening of the underlying homicide in spite of what we know, in spite of the illegality in my understanding of the towing of the body, who made that call, in spite of the misrepresentation of the multiple witness accounts.
The missing body cam, why it was turned
Missing
off,
body
like a lot of
cam,
things.
and the idea, that the deputy AG has said that Scott Spivey was advancing on the other truck, but the lack of evidence to support that he was walking towards the other truck. There's no evidence to support that. And now that the clothes were tampered with or removed inappropriately. So there's just a lot of, it's a source of immense frustration for the family.
And also what happened with there was a camera in Boyd's car. And,
That's the big one.
he tells, I think in one of the texts, he tells his mother that he's got maybe started it late, but it's there. But where is that?
Well, and what you're talking about is, this was the truck that Weldon Boyd had, and you can hear the officers, kind of joking about it in some of the body cam footage. It's $100,000 truck. It is a very powerful super truck, that commonly, they were joking around about this. These cops were joking around. What does he do? Drive it off bridges and film him, jumping rocks and stuff. And you can look on the internet, and it's just done. The thing that's done is to put in an aftermarket dash cam, to put in a tablet that records all of your exploits in your powerful truck. And that, there are multiple videos that Boyd had posted of him, of other drivers, for example, and of using the truck. So you can see in the video, you can see in all the evidence photos, there is a tablet mounted to the dash. And it is returned immediately to Weldon Boyd that week, without anybody looking at its contents. And you can hear him on a call with his mother, and she says, well, what does the video say? And what does it show? And he goes, I don't know. Did it capture everything, or did it cut off too soon? I haven't seen the video. This is when the 2 or 3 days when he still doesn't have his truck back. And you can hear him. There's other text messages where he tells people that he has a video. But when the phones and that tablet were finally turned over to SLED for inspection in November, 2 months later, the tablet was completely empty. There was nothing on it.
Well,
There might be some money to be had, though. He has $100,000 truck. Maybe there's a little bit of money.
He's also very highly leveraged. His dad gives him grief about it because they're trying to sell the ex-fiance's 4Runner. It only had 2,000 miles on it, but it was a $70,000 vehical. And his father's given him grief about spending too much money on things. So
$5,000, 5 carat diamond ring too. Yeah. There's that.
We don't hear much about Bradley Williams. We don't hear much interviews of him, his take on it, things like that.
Yeah, Bradley Williams is Weldon Boyd's very dear friend who is in the passenger seat. They went to They went to technical college together for a couple years and became really good friends. He was just visiting. He came up to go out to they're both gun aficionados, and they were going to the firing range out at Weldon Boyd's farm. And he had just met up with him, not very long, minutes, maybe an hour before this happened, to go out to the farm. So, and Bradley Williams was in the passenger seat. And so if Scott Spivey was on the driver's side, gets out on the driver's side, and you're 25 yards away, it's just not clear that Bradley Williams, if he would have, he certainly fired his firearm many times into the back of the truck. But Weldon Boyd says multiple times, it was my bullet that killed him. I'm the one who killed him. They've confirmed that to me.
But Bradley was firing.
I'm sorry?
Bradley Williams was firing.
He was firing, but Weldon Boyd is the one who says, I was the one that killed him. Okay. I killed him. It was me. And they even talk about hoping that that there'll be some proof point around what bullet killed him, because Weldon Boyd feels very certain he was the one that did. But Bradley Williams is very shaken up by this whole thing, and one of the things you hear in the secretly recorded audio is you can hear a separate recording from the 911 tape that's where they're recording the call from inside the vehicle. So you hear the gunfire going off, pow, 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 pow. You hear it, and it finally dies down. And then at the very right in that silence, Bradley Williams is the only other person in the vehicle, and he says to Weldon Boyd, um, "Damn it, why couldn't you leave him alone? Why couldn't we leave him alone?" About Scott Spivey. So it is one of those things where, and then repeatedly in the calls, people will say, "How's he doing? He's not used to being in this type of situation." So I think Bradley Williams is texting with his wife the next morning, and she goes, "Well, I want to hear all about it." And he said, "Well, it's just another typical day with Weldon."
Yeah. And he doesn't, I listened to some of the audio, and he's talking to Weldon. He does not play along with Weldon's kind of bravado, if you will. He does
Yeah, he
not
seems he
fight.
seems more subdued. He
Yes.
definitely does. But certainly he's named in the civil lawsuit
Okay.
as a defendant. But the family really holds Weldon Boyd responsible, since he was the one that was driving and made the decision to chase. So they hold them both responsible from a legal standpoint, but I think from a, just in their they feel like Weldon Boyd was the person who was culpable in chasing down their son,
The aggressor.
the aggressor.
It's a two-part, which will probably be many parts, but at this point, two parts in the Wall Street Journal. Valerie Bauerlein is our dear friend from the Murdaugh stuff, and she the book, The Devil at His Elbow, sitting right here in front of us.
Wait, and it's coming out in paperback soon,
It's
right?
coming out in paperback on,
Oh.
on June 2nd. So yeah, I'm excited for that. The book has been really well received, and I'm it was an honor to get to sit in court with y'all every day for 6 weeks and then get a chance to write about it. I will say that this story, was a two-part series that ran in the Wall Street Journal, and it's really meant to be read on your phone in many ways, because the way we have so much multimedia. It's a much richer story in terms of the media we can use to show you. Okay, we can tell you the officer walks up, and then Boyd walks up and says, "I'm a veteran," first thing, but then we can show you in the video. So if your readers get,
Yes.
if your listeners get a chance to pull it up, I encourage you to read it on the phone.
Yes, please do.
I
On
would
Apple
say,
News. Apple News, it actually showed up on my feed, and you can listen to part 2.
Mhm.
It shows up in your audio.
It really is extraordinary. And I would say that I have had more response from readers to this story than any story I've had at 20 years at the Journal, and that includes the Alec Murdaugh coverage.
Wow.
Hundreds and hundreds of emails, and it was just one of the best read stories of the year, meaning that it really resonated with people. They read every word, they sent it to people. And the number one email I get from people is, "Where's part 3? How can this
I
be
know.
unresolved?"
Part 3 is coming, right?
We'll continue. We're definitely staying on this story. I think that there is a sense that we want to explain to people that this is not an outlier. Sadly, this is a situation that happens fairly frequently, where these investigations just begin and end, as soon as they began.
Well, Valerie is an amazing writer and reporter, and so the way she lays this out in the order in which you did, I found very interesting.
She knows how to weave a story.
Yeah, it was like perfect how it came together, and a lot more than we could possibly put in a podcast, because you get to know each of the players in this, their background, their story, and I think that's very important to help put it together. So yeah, get the Wall Street Journal articles, get the Wall Street Journal, and follow Valerie also on socials.
The socials, yeah, I'm really lame at it, but it's at @vbauerlein on Twitter, and then on my Instagram, which is valerie.bauerlein. But it's an honor to get to sit here and talk with y'all about this story. So thank you.
And we'll be seeing you in a month or two, I believe.
Yeah, at the Wilmington Book Festival.
Yeah.
Oh, so y'all, it's going to work out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna be there.
Well, let's put in a plug. So the New Hanover County Library reached out to me about making The Devil at His Elbow their book of, the book of this, the all county reads. Like, everybody reads the same book, and they give away several hundred copies. So they called me to ask me to do this, and I was like, "Oh, this is so awesome! Y'all know I'm from New Hanover County." They're like, "Oh, we had no idea."
Oh, they didn't know? Oh, wow.
I had no
Yeah.
idea.
Funny.
But it's in August, and then they really wanted to have y'all come down and talk about this phenomenon of starting your own podcast and focusing on these crimes and the listenership that you've built over time. And so I'm so excited, and it'll be excited just to to go sit on the waterfront and have a meal together too.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, maybe
for
a
sure.
too. Valerie, thank you so much.
Thanks. All right. See
Thanks.
you
See you
guys.
soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
911 in case of emergency.
Hey, I've got a guy pointing a gun at me driving. We're armed as well. He keeps throwing the gun in our faces, acting like he's about to shoot us. If he keeps this up, I'm going to shoot him.
Where are you at?
I'm on Highway 9. We're run. He's trying to run from me now. We're on Highway 9 headed toward Lorist.
Do you have a cross street?
We just passed Marlowe Circle. We're past the Marlowe Circle. We're heading towards Dolores. I'm going to stay with him the whole way. Y'all need to get this guy off the road. He's aiming guns at people. He racked it. He was about to shoot at us. We pulled our guns out. I don't know what this dude's problem is. I'm towing a fucking couch, and he just pulls up next to us and aims a gun at my fucking friend's head.
Okay, what's your name?
Staying with him. He's in a black Chevrolet. His license plate is... It's a Michigan, what does that say? North Carolina weighted tag, Chevrolet black pickup truck. Yes, he's aiming guns. Listen, this dude shoots at me, we're going to put him down. This dude's insane.
Are you following him or is he following you?
He's been following us. Now we're behind him. We've got pictures of him holding. I've got pictures of him aiming the gun at us. Everything. He's about to put the gun out again. Sir, this guy aims that gun at me. We're gonna have to shoot him.
Did it start with a road rage or he just pulled up next to you?
I didn't do it. I was talking to my friend. We're trailering couches, and this dude my buddy's like, "What the fuck?" And he's got a gun aimed at us next to us. Then he tried to slam on brakes and wreck me, ran me into the grass. He just swerved at me. I need a trooper fast. Y'all, he may shoot at the cop too, man. Tell the cops we're in a white Ram pickup truck and we are armed. I'm military, so it ain't us. Don't shoot us. But this dude's fucking nuts.
Did he say anything to you or just point the gun at you?
Nah, he's turning off the road. We're going to keep trying to follow him, but if he starts shooting, dude, I don't know. All right, so he's turning onto Camp Swamp Road.
What road?
Camp Swamp Road.
Camp
He's
Swamp
stopping.
Road.
He's stopping. Hey, we're about to have a fucking shootout, dude. This dude's got a gun. He's got a fucking gun.
Do you have an address where he stopped at?
We're at, hey, I can't put it in gear.
Are you guys shooting? Hello? 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 I think.
Backing up.
Are you guys shooting at each other?
Hey, boss, please.
Are you guys shooting at each other?
He aimed and shot. He held his gun and aimed right at us. Dude, please come help us, man.
Has anybody shot?
I don't know. Dude, I don't want to go over there. This guy will try to kill us. I don't know if he shot or not, man. He shot fucking first. The dude shot at us. Why the fuck would he do that?
Where are you at?
I'm on Camp Swamp Road.
You turned off from 9, you're on Camp Swamp Road?
Yes, this dude, he fucking shot at us. Why the fuck would he do that?
I don't know.
Man, what the fuck? Man, he might be dead. We don't know, man.
Did you
Why
hit
the
him?
fuck would he do? Why did you fucking do that? How quick can you get me a cop here?
They're coming. You think you hit him?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. He got out, held the gun up, and then he racked it. And when he racked it, I tried to put the truck in reverse and get the fuck out of here. And then he shot. I don't know if he shot my truck. I don't know where it hit. But as soon as he shot, man, I shot back. I can't risk my fucking life like that.
I understand.
I can't hear. I can't hear you. I'm in my truck and it's loud. I've got to get out my truck and see if this dude's alive or not.
Okay.
All right. Do I get off the phone? What do I do?
No, stand.
Do you have another mag? Hand me another mag.
How far
That's
from
what's
Highway
left?
9 are you on Camp Swamp Road?
Do you want me to check to see if the guy's alive or not?
I wouldn't get too close in case he shoots again. How far from Highway 9 on Camp Swamp are you?
We're right off the road.
How far away from him are you?
I was trying to back up and get away from him. I'm probably
Okay.
30 yards. Yeah, he fucking shot at it. He swung at me on the road. He held a gun out the window. Don't go up there, man. The dude's crazy. Did you see him do that to us? Please fucking stay here and talk to this cop. Please don't leave.
Is there an officer there?
No, there's a guy here who said he watched the dude do all this to us.
Okay. How far apart are you from the other vehicle?
30 yards. Please don't leave, please. Man, how far out are we?
They're on the way. I'll stay on the phone with you until I get there.
How far out did you say?
They're on the way. Hold on.
Can I call my mama?
911 call is very interesting. You hear the whole side of at least Weldon Boyd's story as he's going down the road, but it is sad.
Why didn't the 911 operator at any point tell him, hey, let law enforcement handle this? I thought that was really strange.
Yes, and it is it's one of those life lessons or story that you can use to tell your kids.
I actually had this
or husbands or wives.
conversation with my whole entire family. Like, hey, if you see someone acting erratically with a gun or maybe cutting you off, it's just best to just stand back.
Let it go.
Let it go.
There's no good ending that's going to come from this.
No, it is so sad. And I also really want to dive deeper into the South Carolina stand your ground laws because I don't know, that fascinates me from a legal perspective.
And she said, 28 states, something like that, have a version of a stand your ground law.
Yeah.
But we will have Turney on to talk about that because it is fascinating. She said hundreds of these type of incidents happen.
Yeah, and you really only hear about it if it involves some sort of racial something or
some reason that the national news grabs it, but otherwise it's happening. All right, so we'd love your comments on it and your thoughts, and you can do that through the Impact of Influence Facebook page, or the YouTube channel. In the show notes, we'll tell you how you can get a hold of Valerie Bauerlein from the Wall Street Journal. We'll have her information.
And we'll link her articles to our Facebook page.
There you go. And remember, we're part of the Evergreen Podcast Company. Support our sponsors. Yay. And we're forever grateful. And we'll talk soon, friend.